All right, great. Good morning. It is so great to see everyone this morning for this webinar. And we thought that we could get started with some introductions. So if everyone wants to introduce themselves in the chat, and you can share your name, your role, where you're joining from. We'd love to get the chat going this morning. My name is Adrienne Gerard, and I'm the director of the training and technical assistance team for First Steps Together. And really just wanted to welcome everyone to this morning's webinar. Um, this webinar is our first in our 2024 webinar series that's introducing our innovative resource, Taking the First Steps Together, a guide for creating collaborative, peer-led services for parents affected by substance use. This morning, we're going to look at the first chapter, which is foundational concepts and theory. And this series is for anyone who is looking to launch or further develop or enhance their peer-led home visiting or clinical services for families impacted by parental substance use. And they take place on the fourth Tuesday of the month at 9:30. And each month, we're going to highlight a different chapter of the guide, explore the concepts, offer examples from practice, and tools to support both the staff working in the field and the families they serve. And you're welcome to join any individual webinar of interest or the series of the whole. And we're glad to see you this morning. So this morning, we're going to do a quick overview of the guide and how it's structured and how to navigate it, and review some of the foundational concepts in chapter 1. And at the end, we're going to have an opportunity for question and answer. So I wanted to do some quick housekeeping, talk a little bit about First Steps Together, and then I'll hand it over to our amazing presenters this morning. So this meeting is being recorded, and it will be available publicly, and we'll send out a link to the recording and the resources after the webinar. We're asking you to please mute when you're not speaking, and feel free to mute to ask any questions or discussion, and please do share in the chat throughout, and we will have a question and answer at the end. So for those not familiar with First Steps Together, we are a home visiting program dedicated to serving and empowering families on their parenting and recovery journeys. We have sites across Massachusetts that serve parents and expectant parents who have been affected by substance use. We offer voluntary and free services in the home community delivered by a peer support specialist who's a parent in recovery, or a mental health counselor with specialized training. And we also offer groups and care coordination. First Steps Together is open to any person 18 years of age or older who's used opioids, stimulants, alcohol, cannabis, or other substances in the past or present, and who is pregnant or expecting a child or has at least one child age 5 or younger. At the bottom of the screen, you can see a link to our website, firststepstogetherma.org, where you can find out more information on our sites, including contact information. So we'd like to share just a couple of reminders. So first is some topics might bring up some feelings or experiences, so please make sure that you care for yourselves, and if you need a break, please do so. The information that we're sharing is what we have found out today, and what we know so far, and we really welcome conversations about this topic and are really happy to hear from others' experiences in the field. We recognize that accepted language and best practices are ever evolving. And as presenters, we aim to create a brave space for diversity, equity, inclusion, and expect that others will be willing to engage in the same way. So I'm going to hand it over to these amazing presenters who have a ton of experience and expertise that they're bringing today. Deborah Berkovitz, who's the First Steps Together director, and she's the Perinatal and Parenting Substance Use Director at the Division of Pregnancy, Infancy, and Early Childhood at the Bureau of Family Health and Nutrition at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. Erica Napolitan is the Assistant Director at First Steps Together Training and Technical Assistance Team. Amy Summers, the Clinical Director at the Center for Early Relationship Support at Jewish Family and Children's Service. And Sophia Terry is the Clinical Program Specialist at the First Steps Together Training and Technical Assistance Team. And we're really thankful that you are here today, all of you. So to start off, I'm going to pass it to Deborah.
Hi. Thank you so much. I'm really excited about this webinar series. So I founded First Steps Together in 2018, but in my own direct work experience, First Steps Together has its roots going back 17 years to two programs called A Helping Hand and Fresh Start. And these were collaborations between the Department of Public Health and the Department of Children and Families and the Institute for Health and Recovery. And we were really focused on improving services for families of infants with prenatal substance exposure. And I say this because while we might not be an evidence-based model or practice, although we incorporate many into our program that we'll be talking about throughout the webinar series, we're certainly a model of practice-based evidence. And one of our greatest strengths is that we have had the flexibility and the humility to continuously adjust our work to what we learn from the families with whom we partner and from each other. And this guide, as Adrienne said, reflects a point in time of our learning that we will continue to grow from. Programs and implementation guides often focus on how, but I believe that when we have a strong why, the rest falls into place. And First Steps Together, to me, isn't really a program, it's an approach. It's a philosophy of work and care and of human interaction that allows us to take steps together to support families in their recovery process. And this guide shares the why and the how. And if you look at the beginning of the guide, we're not going to talk about it today, but there's the first couple of pages have the underlying assumptions, which I think are really valuable to understand. So I'm going to talk a little about, for me, some of the heart of the why that that you know that I love to talk about this. What we know about addiction is that it's a disease of isolation, and that recovery is a celebration of connection to ourselves, to each other, to our children, and to the resources that we need to thrive. And this program and every choice that we make in it is fundamentally about fostering connection. Dehumanizing people disconnects us. There are many things that dehumanize that we're powerless over, that are beyond our sphere of influence. But there are other things that we can do something about. We dehumanize people when we shame them or blame them for current behaviors that are often rooted in past experiences that they were not protected from. We dehumanize people when we talk about each other as cases, when we lead with someone's cause of death and not who they were in life. We dehumanize when we set standards and develop policies that are agency first rather than person first. We dehumanize when we can only see the self-centeredness and suffering that addiction can bring and not the multifaceted person who is still standing there in front of us. We dehumanize each other when we hold a double standard of care for those who deserve dignity, respect, and investment of time and resources. We dehumanize people when we refer to someone by the name of an agency that they work for rather than by their name or position. We dehumanize when we think that someone is no longer a parent when they don't live with or have a legal relationship with their children. We dehumanize others when we tell them what to do rather than asking them what they want or need to do. We connect, we rehumanize in First Steps Together. We rehumanize when we make use of very hard things in our lives to bring hope to others. We rehumanize when we reach out again and again and again to people who are making excellent decisions to not trust based on their past experiences. We rehumanize when we earn their trust by showing up, being present, and helping them to uncover and get what they need to live the lives that they want to live. We rehumanize when we take the perspective of other working professionals and we ask ourselves, what are the tools that they are given to do their jobs? What fears and hopes are driving them? What supports do they have? We rehumanize when we lead with respect, an open heart, an open mind, and a deeply held belief in the transformative power of recovery. In these processes, we help to rehumanize ourselves, we help to rehumanize others, and we help to rehumanize systems. So I want to thank everybody for the work that you do, whether you're in First Steps Together, whatever's bringing you here with us today, and for helping us all to learn more about how families recover. And I really look forward to getting here to hear from two brilliant women who I have very long relationships with. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. It's always so inspirational and grounding for me to hear from you and just remind us all why we do this work. think that's like the perfect way to start off today. And I just wanted to give everyone some context for our training. Deborah shared about some of the how and the why of why we do this work. And I'm going to share a bit about the how and why of why we created these resources. As Deborah shared, First Steps Together was launched as the pilot program. So when we set out to create this resource, we really envisioned that it was going to be an implementation manual for our First Steps Together sites in doing this work. But now, multiple years later, the guide has grown to an over 300-page guide. It's a huge labor of love, and we've gotten input from parents and professionals across the state. We received input from content experts across the fields, and we paid special attention to the voices of those with lived expertise and those who represent often marginalized populations within the recovery community. The final product that we're going to be sharing with you today has become a resource for anyone embarking on or expanding their work in peer-led programs that serve families impacted by parental substance use. So we can go to the next slide, and this is a look at our program materials. These are, the left-hand side is an image of the cover of the guide, and the center image is a cover of the family portfolio, and the right-hand image is the family portfolio provider guide, and I'm going to show you how these all fit together on the next slide. So this guide is the compilation of theory, practice, process, and experiences of so many people who are doing this work. I can't tell you how many people have provided input from across our project, other projects. We really wanted this to be reflective of everyone's professional and personal experience navigating these systems. So the guide is divided into 3 sections. The first is building the foundation, the next is serving families, and the final is the My Family Portfolio, which also has an accompanying provider guide. The first section is in yellow, which you can see here on the table of contents, and it's building the foundation for the work. So this might be a good section for those who are considering starting a peer-led service program, or those who want to better understand how to hire and build teams, how to prepare their organization. It includes information on recruiting, hiring, and training, and how to strengthen supervision. The next section, which is in blue, is on serving families. This section is really about how we actually do the work. So how to talk about engagement with folks, how to form and sustain that engagement with participants, what our process is, and all of the things that we consider when planning for and doing home visits, how we plan for and run groups, and how we collaborate with other providers for care coordination, which is a huge piece of our work, both sourcing concrete needs for families, but also collaborating with child welfare services, early intervention, any other providers doing this work. We are really like pro collaboration in our program. And I just wanted to note that each section is not only information about how and why we do the work, but there's also quotes from staff, there's links to resources, there's pull-out tools that we can use with families. So you'll see as we go. And lastly, the third section is in purple, and that's the family portfolio and the accompanying provider guide. The family portfolio is a workbook to use with families, and the provider guide kind of walks providers through how to support families with the portfolio. So there's like languages advocacy and ways that we can talk about the tools both with families and other providers. And we can go to the next slide, and this will show you kind of more close up the covers of both. Some of y'all may have been to our training specifically on the family portfolio, which we can share. But the My Family Portfolio is the last chapter of the full guide, but it's also a pull-out resource. So it's a workbook created by our training team for parents in recovery and by parents in recovery. It's a collection of tools and resources for families impacted by parental substance use to help support both the parent and their recovering journeys and their relationship with their child. We've created a comprehensive approach of how we serve individual parents and families, and all of these tools can be tailored to each family's unique needs. So again, it can be, as with most of our resources, completed tool by tool or in its entirety. But we spent many, many hours collaborating and brainstorming what was important when it came to building recovery and parenting skills. So many parents in recovery gave their stories, their ideas, their input into the creation of these tools. We heard from so many folks, like, I wish I had this when I was going through my early parenting, my early recovery. There's a section specific to parents who are separated from their children, whether that be for child welfare involvement or other reasons. And this is like our gift to the space. We put so much love into it. We're happy to chat with anyone about it and provide support. But this is the final chapter of the larger guide. And today we're going to be focusing on chapter 1.1, foundational concepts and theory. For those that are following along, the image on the left-hand side is the cover of the section, Building the Foundation, which is on page 15 of the guide. And on the right-hand side is the cover page for this chapter, Foundational Concepts and Theory, which is on page 16 of the larger guide. And today we're going to be looking inside chapter 1.1, Foundational Concepts and Theory. This chapter covers a lot of the important beliefs, understandings, approaches, and practices for our project. And as you can see in the left-hand column, we circled the topics we're going to cover today. It's way too much to do in one webinar, so we're prioritizing a piece of it. Today, we're going to explore the power of peer work, language as advocacy, all paths of recovery, healing-centered care, trauma-informed care, understanding the intersection of trauma, substance use, and parenting, and perinatal mental health, substance use, and parenting. And we encourage everyone, of course, to please check out the second half of the concepts on your own. And some of you may already have hard copies or PDF copies, but if you do not have a copy of the guide and you would like to follow along, you can get it right now by going to our website, www.firststepstogetherma.org, and you can easily just download a copy so you can look on as we go. And we'll give folks maybe a minute to do that. And I'm going to pass it over to Erica.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for walking us through that. And hopefully you are taking the opportunity to download the guide if you don't have a copy yet. But as Sophia said, my name is Erica Napolitan. I work with the training and TA team for the First Steps Together project. But my most important job is as a mother in long-term recovery. I came to recovery almost 15 years ago, coming up on my 15 years. As a pregnant mother, I had been in a really dark space. I had lost custody of my older children. I was struggling. I was in the dark. I entered treatment at on MAT, and I really began my journey there. And there's this quote here being shared, and it's actually my quote. And it's something that I wrote. And in here, you'll see that it says there is incredible power in peer work. And I am so grateful for the opportunities in my life that have come from doing the work of serving families in recovery. And I truly mean that. So as I mentioned, when I came to recovery, I was pregnant. I was on MAT. My life was, starting to piece itself back together, but I was still really in the dark. And I was introduced to the Fresh Start program that Deborah mentioned earlier. It was one of the first programs in the state of Massachusetts that used peers to serve parents in recovery. Through that, I was matched with a family support specialist that was another mother in recovery. And I can honestly say I was blown away. I was maintaining sobriety. I was working with my clinician. Things were going really good. I was seeing my OB. I was doing all the things, but there's so many spaces in my life that still felt dark and messy, and I didn't have much hope. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was scared about being a parent again. And I had issues with access to resources. There was just so many things that felt like they were piled up on top of me, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And this woman walked into my life, and she sat down with me right next to me and shared a bit of her own story. And I was blown away by the fact that this was another mother in recovery. Up until that point, I didn't know what happens once you went into recovery. Like, where do you go from there? Can you still be a parent? Can you be successful? What does it look like? And she was sitting in front of me, she dressed nice, and she had this job where she got to do this, and she had a home with her children, and she was doing all the things that I so desperately wanted to do. And in my very, very dark moment, she gave me hope. she shined this light into my life that I absolutely needed. And she met me right where I was in my mess and helped me step by step find my path. And that's really what peer work is about. We really get this opportunity to come and walk alongside other people or other parents in recovery and help them find their path and walk it with them while we shine the light on the path ahead. We don't do the work for them. We don't walk for them, but we can give them hope for their future and be there with them. And there's just something so unique about sitting with this person that just changed the course of my life forever. From there, I was able to give birth to my baby, and with the support of my peer and my other providers, I was able to bring him home from the hospital and begin parenting. I did everything that the Fresh Start program had to offer. I graduated the program. I started volunteering with them because I just could not let them go. I loved the environment that I was in. I started going back to school. And then I had a wonderful opportunity to share my story publicly at a conference they were having. And it was at that moment that they offered me a job on their team as a family support specialist and a medication assisted treatment advocate. So then I went from receiving this incredible gift of peer work to being able to give it to others. And it was just one of the most impactful experiences of my life because I got to take the hard, I got to take the scary, I got to take the dark parts of my life and use them for good. I got to sit with other people and give them hope and understanding, knowing that I had maybe not walked through what they had walked through, but I had walked through something similar and I had gotten out on the other side, and that I might not know what their path looks like, but I know the way towards the light and I can help get them there. And it was just such an incredible piece of my own recovery and my own healing, but it felt so good to be able to give back to other people. And I was able to do that for many years and loved it so much that when that program ended, I moved from Western Mass all the way out to the Boston area to work at Project Nest and continue doing this work. And spread this message of how powerful peer work really is. We went to hospitals, we went to service providers, we spoke nationally about how important having peer support for people, especially pregnant women and parents, actually is, because it's just this, again, incredible gift that we can give people to have someone to walk alongside you that has been there before and understands where you're going. So now I have the opportunity to walk alongside peer staff as they support other families. And it's just been this amazing experience to watch this work grow, watch families change, watch the impact that it's had on so many lives across our state and across our country. It's just incredibly powerful. Next slide, please. So the power of peer work. Parenting is hard. Parenting in recovery is even harder. And in our program, our peer staff, what we call family recovery support specialists, are parents in recovery themselves that have been through this journey of parenting while in recovery. And it's this thing where there's never a time where we're just a person in recovery or we're just a parent. We're always both, no matter what our custody situation is or where we are in our life, we are parents in recovery. So our staff are uniquely skilled to walk alongside parents that are just starting their recovery and parenting journey or even further along the path to provide whatever support that they need so that they can really have an impact on these families. And this is the reason why they are uniquely qualified to walk alongside families that are impacted by parental substance use. Peer work also can you go back? Thank you. And so it also really, using peers to support recovery really offers this hope. As I had mentioned in my own story, I was sitting in this space where I was in early recovery. I didn't know what direction to go in. I didn't know what the future could look like. It was dark, it was lonely, and this is often the case for many people, especially in those early days. Having a peer come alongside me and see the potential in me and the potential in my future when I can't see it myself, or when our participants can't see it themselves, is just absolutely amazing. So we have this peer that comes alongside and they can really demonstrate the possibilities for the future. And it increases engagement, oftentimes due to stigma, guilt, shame, past experiences in treatment. It doesn't always feel safe to speak your truths about your experiences as being a parent in recovery. Using a peer makes it safe. It takes away that layer of judgment. Sitting with someone that has had similar experiences, that isn't going to judge you for those things that feel dark and horrible, or wherever it may have brought you, to be able to just sit and be yourself and speak your truths and not have fear about it is incredible. And what this does is it really opens the door for other providers through connecting with a peer and building a trusting relationship and seeing what a trusting relationship really can be. Really does open that door so that we can engage better with clinicians or other treatment providers or our doctors or whoever it is in our lives, and connect with people in groups. And it really is the foundation, the building block of how we can help people move to that next level in their healing journeys. And I just want to add here that peer work is not limited to people in recovery. There are many different types of peers. We see peers being utilized in mental health agencies and hospitals, in working with parenting for parents that have children that have some extra needs. Peers can be anything that you could possibly imagine, and there really is power in using your own lived experience. So we have, even if you're not a peer, we have this ability to use our own experiences in our work that we do when we feel comfortable. For example, say we're sitting with a participant and they have a referral coming up for early intervention, and they're really anxious about it and they don't know what that's going to look like. But perhaps you have had your own experience with early intervention and you remember what it felt like to be that mom. Whether you're comfortable or not to name that it was your own experience, you can use the experience that you had with early intervention to ease the anxiety of the parents. You can explain, this is what a visit looks like. This is what the evaluation is going to be. This is the information they're going to give you. And that really is an example of using peer work or lived expertise. It does not have to be me showing up because I'm a person in recovery, but it's me showing up with the experience and expertise that I've gained through my personal and professional life to help build somebody else up. So we wanted to share with you a couple of quotes from some of our participants in the program, and I'm actually going to just read these so that I get them correct. So one participant said, if I have somebody reading out of a book and they're just like, this is how you should feel or what you should do, then I'm not going to want to listen to them. But if somebody is like, hey, I've been there, I've been at my lows, I've been at my highs, like they're more relatable. So I think that's like a big thing for recovery. And I think it makes them easier to talk to about stuff too. I had an amazing recovery coach, excuse me, that was always there when and if I needed her. I felt like she could relate with me on a lot of things in my life. She was very helpful with my recovery. She helped me with whatever I needed help with at any time, gave me tons of resources. I would definitely recommend to another person in recovery. My family recovery support specialist was really easy to relate to. She was very open and honest, as much as she could be, to keep it on a professional level. She wasn't just sharing her experience. She was helping me through mine with what maybe she had learned in the past or how she got through or what helped her. She was there every difficult time that I was going through. She was there. And I feel like these just really speak to the power of having a peer on your team. Really does have. So there's also some special considerations to think about when we're talking about the power of peer work. So peer work really takes courage and strength. Showing up as a person in recovery, using your lived experience in every space of your work, whether that be with your participants, in your agency, when you're working with larger systems like child welfare or other providers. When you're showing up as a peer, you're showing up as a person in recovery. You're giving a piece of yourself in every way, shape, or form. And that takes incredible strength and courage to continue to show up, giving of yourself at every moment. Being a peer can really be a reminder of our past experiences, especially when situations are similar or remind us of our past. We peers and all providers walk through families through some really challenging things. And sometimes those things can remind us of our own thoughts and feelings and bring up some of our past. And this is really something that we want to think about when we're thinking about using peers to do work. And that really brings me to like peer work should not be done alone. Peers need peers. It says it right in the name. It really does take a community of colleagues to support each other to do this work. It is vital in maintaining wellness as we work with families or people in recovery when we're using our own lived experience. And this really leads to why it requires extra support and supervision. We should be able to provide peers with whatever type of supervisory support that they need. We're going to talk about this a little more as we get further into our webinar series, but, having a reflective supervision space, drop-in supervision, really truly having a supervisor that meets the peer where they're at, just like we meet participants where we're at, is crucial to what we do. All right, so we're going to take a little time to have a breakout discussion, and we have a couple questions here. So it's, what does peer work mean to you? And how has the power of peer work impacted your life or your work with families? And I want to just name here, this does not have to be limited to peer work in recovery. This can be, a peer in your personal life, even a friend that has shared experience with you. So just if you are not a peer in recovery, please be open-minded to how some type of lived experience from someone else may have impacted you. And we're going to put you in breakout rooms for, I think, about 9 minutes, and then we'll see you back in a little bit to talk about it. All right. Great to see everyone back. So we just briefly wanted to give you a moment. How did that feel? And is there anything that you'd like to share with the group?
I just want to thank you to my group for listening, because I took up the entire time. So thank you.
Anybody else? All right, well, we will keep moving. We're going to reshare the slides. All right. So thank you. So this really moves us into our next section, which is language as advocacy. And there's a quote here from Michael Botticelli, the former director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. And it really speaks to what we're talking about today. So, language has so much power, and we can literally change the course of someone's life simply with our choice of words. You can alter what people believe to be true about themselves with our choice of language. So it really, choosing words that build people up, sorry, I'm catching my breath. Choosing words that build people up, and so that they can feel the potential within themselves, even when they don't see it. Speaking about recovery and substance use in this way really does not promote, it helps us to not promote this way of shame and guilt, but to help people heal in the way that we talk about it. So we can think about this in the context of parenting, right? I've heard it said that the way that we speak to our children becomes their inner voice. And we really, want to think about, what words do you want your child to use when they think about describing themselves? I imagine that those words are kind words and compassionate words. And that when our children make mistakes, we don't call them names and point our fingers at them and tell them that they're wrong or bad, but that we take that moment to really, pause with them and choose our words and see their strengths and help them build skills to move on to the next time. And this is really how we want to use our language. So I want you to stop for a moment and think about the words that you've heard that have been used to describe people that are struggling with substance use disorder. What comes to mind for you? I know for me that many of the words that I've heard did nothing but break me down or make me feel further ashamed or unworthy or dirty, even in lots of different ways. So this next section is, yeah, Philip, you don't even want to type them. Exactly. There's some really, really hurtful, painful words that are used to describe people that use substances. So this section is really about changing that, about shifting our perspective and about the language that we use to describe the people that we're working with and how we can use that as a form of advocacy. So when we think about language, we really want to consider the impact that our words have on our understanding. Our words that we choose can support or challenge stereotypes. Like I mentioned, we know that our words can build people up or they can break them down, and they can empower or they can blame and shame. And when we're navigating difficult situations, we really want to make sure that we're using neutral language, just like we would if we were writing a note in someone's record. And through this, we really want to maintain this awareness that our words have the potential to change the course of someone's healing journey. We want to always be coming from a compassionate, strength-based, person-first place where we're putting the person before the problem, and really understand that the way that we talk about someone or to someone can shift the way that people see themselves, and it can shift the way that people see others. So I want you to guys share in the chat, what was a time that you felt othered or disempowered by people's language choice? And then what was the time that someone used words to empower you? And I'll give you guys just a minute. People like you. Yeah, that's a rough one. I'm so proud of you. I love that. Negligent. Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Beautiful, human, and process. That's amazing. See, doesn't that feel good? You will never change, and we internalize that message, right? Like that's something that we take home with us, instead of having that beautiful human in process, right? That like, yes, I'm making mistakes, but I can move forward from there. Get over it. Not just words, but more even body language. Body language can speak to us, how people sit with you. Why do you have to be that way? Oh, wow. Being told that you weren't an alcoholic by age 31 because it can't happen that early. That's powerful. And yes, you can do it. I believe in you. So these are some good examples. Like we get different feelings when we hear these words, right? It can make us feel like, oh, and like guilty and shameful, or it can make us feel hopeful. Like maybe I have the potential to get through this. Maybe I can do this next hard thing. It just really is amazing how the words that we use have the ability to just change everything, right? So thank you all for sharing some of those words with us, and you can keep going if you'd like to. We're gonna keep moving along. So I really want you to think and consider the difference. When we say an addict or drug abuser, we can change that to a person who uses substances, or a clean or dirty drug screen. This one gets me. Ugh. Your screen tested positive or negative for substances. A teen mom, young mom, or a former addict or person in recovery. We have examples of this in our daily life in many different places. For example, we could say, instead of saying welfare families, we could say families that receive benefits, or instead of handicapped, we can say a person with a disability, or instead of bad kid or class clown, we can say a child who is asking for help, or a child who is seeking connection. This really just a way for us to shift how we're viewing a person, right? And if you'd like, we can put some other examples of terms we use regularly in our work and how we can change our language to shift it better in the chat. So one of the ways that we do this is by using person-first language. So as you noticed in the last example there, we shifted the term from addict to a person who uses substances. It's an example of shifting from the focus on the problem to the focus on the person. When we use person-centered or person-first language, we literally put the person before the issue. This places the focus on the person and their humanity rather on having the focus be on the issue or the challenge they're experiencing. We really want to structure our language in this way to make it clear that we are people regardless of our struggles, that parents are parents. It doesn't matter if they're using substances, that we're emphasizing our humanity and that people are more than their problems. They're more than their diagnoses. It's not, we're not defined by them. It really, that a person isn't, their diagnosis of addiction, but they're a person that's struggling with substances, and that changes the narrative and how we think about it. So being conscious to put that person first, and that parents are parents first, and they're members of their families, and they are whole people that have talents and interests and goals and dreams, and they're members of their communities. And we want our language to reflect how we see and value each person. So we're going to do a couple of examples from practice here, or an example from practice. But so here's the scenario. As you're a home visitor and you're sitting with a participant for a meeting with another service provider who describes the participant's child as born addicted. We can use this opportunity to say something like, I noticed that you are using a term that we have really moved away from. Saying a baby is born addicted can not only be stigmatizing, it is also just not correct. Babies can be born exposed or dependent on substances, but that is not addiction. Addiction requires behaviors that are done repeatedly, even when there are negative consequences. I know this maybe doesn't seem like a big thing, but the language we use is really important, and I appreciate your openness to this. I actually recently had this come up in an experience for me personally, where I was in a parenting group myself, and one of the people that were leading was talking about how she was going to be doing an internship working with parents who had addicted babies. And this term just gets me. And I was able to stop the group and step in and explain this concept. And what I'm sharing is because what was amazing about it was her whole thought process around it shifted. When I was able to really say these words to her and think about like the impact that saying that has on the parent and the impact that has on clearly the systems that she was operating in, and how this wasn't even a possibility that a baby could be born addicted, really shifted the way she was thinking about it. And she started speaking about it differently. And I saw this whole change happen in her. And it may not be comfortable to step in and say these things, but this is a really great example of language as advocacy, because when we change the narrative around this, we get to change the way that systems operate around this. And it's so important that we use our voices to educate and our language to make change. So just like person first, we have strength-based language, which really, again, puts the strengths before the problem. So we want to like look at this as looking for the strengths in each person rather than their challenges. And we want to shift our perspective towards wellness and wholeness, like seeing even challenging behaviors as an expression of stress or trauma responses, and those can be seen as strengths. Really, for example, we can make sense of these challenges not as deficits, but as coping mechanisms, like as examples of being resourceful, or our body and brain's way of protecting us and surviving. So we were going to do a little activity, but in the time wise, we're just going to kind of rush through this a little bit. So thinking about shifting our language, we're going to match these up. So for suffering from, we could think this to, I'm going to click the slide, working towards recovery from. Non-compliant in the program, there are barriers to accessing services. Dependent on supports, resourceful in meeting their needs. And we can see how that shifts and feels different when we change the way that we're thinking about it. All right, and I'm going to hand it over to Sophia to talk about All Paths to Recovery.
Thanks, Erica. So this brings us to All Paths of Recovery, and this is a quote from one of our program staff members, which I'll share with you. Many paths brought me to where I am today, and I'm sure there will be more ups and downs to come. I do know there is no wrong way. All paths to recovery work. And for those of us in recovery, I hope we can all walk them together, holding hope for those still in the dark, using our strength and experience to light the way. I love how this quote highlights the idea of recovery as a light in the dark for those still struggling, and also names that there's lots of different ways to do this, and everyone needs to find what works for them. Go to the next slide. So our program supports all paths of recovery. We understand that people start using substances for many reasons. Some people to self-medicate or cope with past or present trauma or shame or difficult life circumstances. And often when people working towards recovery feel like they're not doing enough or they're not meeting their goals, which might be like maintaining abstinence or sobriety, they might be overcome with guilt and shame and self blame, which can then perpetuate this cycle of using substances to cope with how they feel. And as Erica said in the languages advocacy portion, a lot of people have internalized these ideas about themselves from whether it's like a teacher in school or like providers in the healthcare system or in the treatment system that like, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. Like it's a choice, like I'm doing this to myself or my family. We know addiction is not a choice. But when we're meeting people where they're often coming to us with these like beliefs about themselves. So to help avoid the sense of pressure, we want to celebrate even the smallest pieces of progress or success. And to do this, our project uses a participant-driven harm reduction approach. And this is a great quote, which I feel like really like defines this approach. When we accept that substance use or alcohol disorder is a disease, then we can understand that a relapse is the recurrence of symptoms associated with that disease. This allows us to stop stigmatizing someone's actions as a moral failing. Just as a person with cancer or heart disease might have a recurrence of symptoms of their illness, our loved ones with substance or alcohol use disorders can also have recurrence of symptoms. So this is like a great frame, I think, for people when thinking about those who are struggling with substance use and those that are trying to work towards recovery. We want to just keep in mind that recovery often includes relapse. It's not a moral failing. This is just like part of this disease. And some people may be aiming for complete abstinence, but many people also come to us unsure of what they want to do or what's going to work for them. So they might want to like cut back or change the type of substances they use or not use like when their children are around or make sure they're using safely or using with others. There's a huge range of people's individual goals, and we want to support them wherever they're at on this journey. We want to reduce their risk of potential harm and prioritize their personal safety and the safety of their children. So we find it's most effective to work with participants and, uphold their self-determination. Like, what do they want to do for their recovery? What have they found works for them? We want to take into account their personality, their history, their family of origin, their culture, their values. What works for one person is not going to work for someone else. And there's lots of different ways to go about this, like medication, therapy, exercise. Some people meditate or journal, attend groups. Some people do physical exercise. So anything that supports a person's mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health, we want this to be, a journey of wellness. It's not just about physical sobriety because we know that maintaining long-term recovery, you need to be looking at like the whole person and what built them up. And many participants find that multiple supports is kind of the way to go for them. So it's not just an either or thing. It's really what are all of the things that I need to do consistently in order to be well. So it's our role in supporting parents to find what works for them and then to support them in consistently practicing those things so that they can get to where they want to be in terms of their recovery. And this brings us to healing-centered care. Um, I will share this quote with you. A healing-centered approach to addressing trauma requires a different question that moves beyond what happened to you to what's right with you. This views those exposed to trauma as agents in the creation of their own well-being rather than victims of traumatic events. And I just want to, as we move into this next section, hold on to this idea that we're agents of change in our own healing and recovery. I love that. And I think everything we do, every interaction with participants, we should always be thinking about how to empower people um, to be an agent of change in their own life. So, healing centered care, which can also be called healing centered engagement, is an emerging approach that focuses on enhancing the conditions that contribute to well being. Sometimes trauma informed care, which everyone is probably more familiar with, these practices can focus on avoiding triggers or treating symptoms, whereas healing centered care is really focused on strengthening the roots of well being. This approach says that communities and individuals who experience trauma are agents in restoring their own well being, and it places the focus on the well being that we want to see rather than the symptoms that we want to suppress. So that's a helpful way to think about it. Um, this approach also focuses on those providing services and that they feel supported and restored in sustaining their own health and well-being, which I think for our program specifically is huge because um, we know how taxing this work is. It can be really challenging. It can feel really emotional and close to home. Many of us, especially those of us who identify as parents in recovery, are supporting families who are going through things that we ourselves have gone through. So it's like of the utmost importance that we're supporting staff's wellness and self-care too, and kind of refilling our own cup so that we continue to do this supportive work. So healing centered care also prioritizes the staff support piece. And next is trauma informed care. And this is a quote from one of our site program directors. Maintaining a trauma informed lens is understanding that a person is working with what they have to the best of their ability. It may not be pretty or make sense to others, yet being trauma informed is understanding this reality and looking for the person's experience and what they are trying to communicate beyond their behaviors. So this is another thing that we always practice in our program, but um, trying to understand behavior as communication and not just, judging or reading things at face value. Like, what is this person trying to say to me? Or what is this person expressing? Or what are they unable to say to me? And their behavior is showing me. And this is like both for parents and their children. We try to like support parents in seeing their children this way as well. But we don't always have the words, especially when it's something difficult to talk about. It might come across in the way that we like behave, our body language. Somebody no shows for an appointment. There's a million examples of this, but it's all communicating something. So for us to kind of like reshift our thinking about behavior as communication is a big part of being trauma informed. We don't want to put the pressure on our participants to tell us what they've been through. We want to just be sensitive to that most people have been through difficult things. And that is really like the gist of being trauma informed. So, trauma informed care is defined in the guide as a program, organization, or system that is trauma informed. And it realizes the widespread impact of trauma and understands potential paths for recovery. It recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, and staff, and others involved with the system. And it responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices, and seeks to actively resist re traumatization. So, in First Steps Together, we take a trauma informed and healing centered approach in all of our interactions with participants, their families, and their providers. And we encourage our colleagues working in the field of parenting and recovery to do the same. So this requires all of our staff to have an understanding of trauma, its impact on the brain and the body, and the signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and the hope for healing from past trauma. This also means that we're aware of how our participants' trauma histories impact their day-to-day lives, and we recognize the many ways that they can be re-triggered by navigating the healthcare, recovery treatment, and child welfare systems. So this is like a big ask, but it's something that we try to practice in everything we do, and we'll kind of go into what that looks like in the next slides. So you might be more familiar with trauma-informed care, and this is the assumption that many of our families we serve and the people we work with have experienced some trauma and some adversity in their lives. So as I mentioned, instead of inquiring about these experiences, which can bring up big feelings and can be overwhelming and upsetting, we're going to just presume that most people have had difficult or traumatic experiences, most people that we're serving. And this assumption allows us to approach all people with sensitivity. We want to take a curious and caring stance in all of our interactions and to trust that each family is the expert of their own life experience. Some other ways we can use language in a trauma-informed way is to offer content warnings before sharing something that might be potentially difficult information. We can share a preview of what's to come in a home visit, or we can share a written plan or agenda before a meeting so attendees know what to expect. This can be calming and containing for people, help reduce their anxiety. So this can be both for individual home visits or team meetings. There's lots of different scenarios where this could be useful. But generally, for all of us, knowing what to expect helps us feel more calm and contained, and we're able to show up for whatever it is that we have to do. So this is like a generalizable practice. And I'll give you some examples on the next slide. So here's an example. If you're offering a group to a new potential member, you can first preview the group by explaining what to expect. For example, what the group might be like, include what the participant can expect upon arrival, how the space might be set up, how many people might be there, and what the general feel or the vibe of the group might be. Then you can use the practice of previewing again on the actual day of the group. So when the person arrives, you can welcome participants in. Once everyone is settled, you can explain that you're going to preview an agenda for the day, similar to what we did with this training. This might sound like, welcome everyone. Today we are going to start with introductions, and for those who want to, you can share one word about how you're feeling today. We will go around the circle to check in about our week, and then leave some time for any questions or urgent concerns. And at the end, we'll have time for coffee and open conversation. Does this work for everyone? So in this way, in this example, folks can feel prepared. They can reduce their anxiety, and it will allow them to be more present and participate comfortably if they would like to. Similarly, in a home visit, you can greet the parent, get settled in, and share a preview for that day's meeting. You might share your vision for the day. For example, today I was thinking we could check in about the housing questions you had from last week. We have this parent-child coloring activity to do, and then we can follow up on the referral for early intervention. How does that sound? Then if the plan feels like it works for the parent and meets them where they're at on that day, you can begin. It also gives the parent the opportunity to say, no, this doesn't feel comfortable, or no, this is not covering what I feel I need to discuss with you today. And it creates that space for them. It's giving them a seat at the table. It's empowering them to participate and lead the way. And it's showing them that you are like attuned to their needs and that this is a collaborative process, right? That's like hugely, hugely important in building and sustaining relationships with families. And in terms of trauma-informed collaboration, I think I touched upon this in terms of team meetings, but we should always be considerate of any power differentials, any unique needs or learning styles. And this goes for both our work with families and in our collaborations with other providers. So I'll give the example of a team meeting. If we're sitting at a table with a family, and there might also be a child welfare service team, a family therapist, or another provider. I'm going to give you kind of two ways to open the meeting. The first, I could say, okay, everyone, welcome. Today we are coming back together to discuss any progress and outstanding issues or concerns about the Jones family case. Let's begin with a case supervisor. Please share your name and your role, and we'll continue on with the caseworker, the family support provider, and then the family members. So in this example, this might make the parent feel like the other in the room, right? They're going last. They would probably feel disempowered, belittled, and ashamed. They might feel like they're just there to like hear updates about themselves, and they might start to feel anxious of what's going to be shared. You know, they're feeling completely disempowered in this situation. So alternatively, we could open the meeting in this way. The meeting host could say, welcome everyone. As you know, we're here today to get everyone on the same page, to ensure that the Jones family feels supported and that we're working together to best serve this family. Let's go around the table and folks can share their name and their role and anything they want to get out of today's meeting. Let's start with Ms. Jones here. So as you can see, we're starting with the parent here. Even the frame of what we're going to be doing today is kind of like a touch base for the purpose of best supporting the family rather than like checking in about the progress or outstanding issues, right? Which just has like a more negative feel to it. The second introduction gives everyone an equal seat at the table. It encourages the parent to be an active participant, and it offers her the first opportunity to speak. This frame is warm and supportive. It empowers the parent to speak her truth and advocate for her own needs. It's not punitive or shaming, which kind of was the first stance, which might make the parent feel less than the other providers at the table. So as you can see, we really want to be mindful, and this ties into what Erica shared about language choice, but the way that we approach people, how we're trauma informed, how we're making the family feel. And this extends to like every single interaction, right? Even an intake, how we answer the phone, how we talk to people about their life experience, how we explain paperwork to them, how we give them time to participate and ask questions. This thread goes through all of our touches in our work. So this is one of our foundational concepts. And we wanted to just hear from you all. If folks want to share in the chat, what does trauma-informed and/or healing-centered care look like in your work? If people want to just share like one thing they do, it can be even a simple thing. That would be great so we can all be learning from each other. And I think in the interest of time, feel free to share in the chat, but we're going to continue to move on. And I think Amy is going to be sharing with us our next section.
Yeah, if we want to jump right into the next slide. Thank you so much, both Erica and Sophia. It's been lovely to hear your perspectives and your incredible wisdom this morning. So what I'm going to do is take a couple of sections here that are specific kind of nerdy intellectual things that we've thought about as we've built this program. And I think they're really important to emphasize because they really do tie back to the frame of sort of what we understand to be foundational and important and effective in this work. So as we're helping other people build and do this work, we want to be sure to touch back to what we know and the science behind it, and sort of comes from both the lived experience of folks who are in long-term recovery, but also comes from what, science can tell us about the brain and about relationships. So the first place we want to sort of touch on is the importance of the growing body of research that really emphasizes the interconnection of trauma, substance misuse, and parenting. And particularly what is sort of to summarize, we know is that those three things have connections in the brain. They have connections in our behaviors, in our thoughts. Anyone who has lived experiences in those three spaces can certainly affirm that, for example, trauma can lead to very natural feelings of self-doubt and questioning, and parenting will certainly make you question everything you've ever done. And when you're also facing the challenges of establishing a healthy identity as a person in recovery, that's a lot sort of to work through psychologically. And it turns out it's also a lot for your brain. So the parts of your brain that are affected actually overlap. So a couple of things to say about this, and you guys can read the quote from one of our clinicians that sort of is emphasizing what we can do about this that has a positive valence to it. But the other positive things to say are because we know this has informed how we build this program and what we prioritize. So knowing that these things intersect gives us hope and opportunity, because if we can untangle them and sort of if we can impact one of them, we can impact all of them. It also means that we are able to understand the complexity of this work. And when we understand how complex these brain and behavior intersections are for the folks who we're supporting, we can naturally fall back to supporting our workforce and really know that if you're working with parents who are impacted by trauma and substance use and the natural stresses and challenges of early parenting, you can expect that this is going to be hard work. It is going to take a kind of workforce development and workforce support and advocacy for resources in the work that is not necessarily typical to other kinds of work. So that's important to say here. It also means when we're looking at brain change, brains don't change overnight. Neither do humans. They're part of us. In the sort of neuropsychology world, we tell people, you shouldn't do neuropsychological testing on things like people's short-term memory or their ability to connect logical sequences until they have had 6 months of sobriety. Now, I am not a believer that we should wait for 6 months before we provide people treatment, not at all. But I do like that nugget because it reminds us that it can take at least 6 months for the brain to get back to baseline. So when we are looking at models of service that might encourage us to do, 12 sessions or 3 months or get in, get out, I think we want to think about the importance of understanding the brain science and what it tells us about what is going to be the complexity of this work. So let's look at the next slide that sort of gives us just a brief summary of kind of a little bit of what we know. And again, this isn't a brain science overview in any way, but we do know in the epidemiology, the statistics are very clear that the co-occurrence of traumatic experiences and substance use, particularly in women, is very high, sometimes estimated to be up to as many as 90% of women. So 90% of women who have a substance use disorder have also been impacted by trauma. 90% of women who have been impacted by trauma have at sometimes misused substances. So this is this is not sort of a hypothetical. This is the population that we're working with. And again, when we're looking at programs like First Steps Together, when we're looking at programs where people have been on their journeys and are starting parenting, this certainly matches the data that we see. This is absolutely true, and it's not to say every participant, we never want to assume, but it is true sort of statistically that this is who we're working with. And so what that means, I'll tell you the downside, and then the bottom bullet here is the upside. The downside is that we are supporting and helping and encouraging folks whose brain systems for pleasure and reward and motivation have been changed and impacted, and they can change back. This is not permanent. But what I say to people sometimes is, when I talk to people about my work, and maybe if they're saying negative things about people in recovery and, people who are struggling, and well, why do they make this choice? And why can't you help them make better choices? And the thing is, oftentimes people's choice makers are under great duress. I don't like to say they're broken, but their choice makers have been hampered by the effects of substance use and by the effects of trauma. And as was said earlier, choices that folks are making that are real, reasonable choices to survive, to get through trauma, turn out not to be maybe the most effective, impactful choices when things are going well. But our brains can't just unlearn that overnight. And the huge pleasure motivation for survival is really powerful and keeps us doing the same things for a long, long time. So that's the sort of the downside. But the upside is that we actually know a lot about what can change this. And in this intervention, one of the clinical practices that we're rolling out focuses on building reflective function, really the idea to slow down and think about what's happening inside our own brains, to notice our feelings and to notice how our feelings impact what we do. And there is decades of research showing that when we build that, when we flex that reflective muscle in our brains, we actually are bringing in brain changes, and we are actually making it less likely to have an intergenerational transmission of the effects of our brains on our children. So there's no better way when we think about this trauma and substance use, and we think about parenting, where we want to interrupt things for the next generation. And no parent that I've ever worked with doesn't want to change things for the better for their children. We know that by building space to think, to talk out loud about what's going on with our choice makers, with our brains, and to try out different responses, that we are unwiring the brain effects of trauma and substance use and breaking the intergenerational cycle. And the research on that, if you're a nerd, it couldn't be cooler, right? And to be able to tell parents, we actually know, and parents will say to me, I just want help so my kid doesn't end up how I ended up. And I say, we know we can help with that. So that's sort of where we're emphasizing that. And then the other piece that we want to emphasize, again, that just sort of can kind of seem like a zoomed in, but really is a pillar to why we do the work we do and how we built this intervention. It connects to the prior slides. It's just as well the overlap of challenges in mental health and wellness in substance use. And again, that can be understood related to brain changes. So, if your pleasure centers have been hijacked by substances of addiction, then it is harder to feel pleasure from everyday things. And if you're someone who's maybe struggling with low mood, depression, it makes sense that's okay, you can jump forward. It makes sense that our mental health would be impacted. And again, the epidemiology, the research bears that out. It's not to say that this happens 100% of the time, but it is true that many people with substance use disorder also find that whether as an effect of substance use and chronic substance use on their brain, or because they were using substances to actually manage some really painful mental health symptoms to begin with, or both, that mental wellness is a really needed part of their recovery. And again, we know that whether it's using those reflective strategies again, using basic concepts in just counseling and mental health and wellness, we can help people to overcome some of those difficulties. And just a note here with that graphic that we also know that for women, two other things. Women, women experience increased rates of mental health difficulties during the perinatal, peripartum period. So pregnancy and the immediate postpartum and longer term. We see that in rates of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. We see that in rates, unfortunately, of return to use and, a recurrence of symptoms of addiction, where after pregnancy, the changes in hormonal patterns, the stresses of parenting, all of those things can really impact a parent's mental health and well-being. And we really need to be attentive to that as a program, to be alert to mental health resources, to be immediately able to understand what we call yellow flags and red flags in mental health, and make sure that we can connect parents to the support they need. But the other thing to say about this is that because of all the changes that happen during pregnancy, it is a time of opportunity. And that's been true in the research for many, many years, that any mental health intervention that we know is more impactful when it's delivered during pregnancy and early parenting, because anyone who has been a parent can recognize the huge psychological and physiological and systems reorganization that goes on when you become a parent. So there is opportunity there. There are a couple of pitfalls that I think all programs would be wise to attend to. One is that there are still massive disparities in rates of perinatal health and mental health for women of color, for non-white women. And so I think we need to attend to the disparities, particularly in pregnancy outcomes, morbidity, and mortality for non-white women, and make sure that we are advocating and using all those tools that we talked about using language alongside women of color to make sure that their health care needs are taken very seriously. Hemorrhage is real, stroke is real. Unfortunately, loss of life is real. We need to be championing that. And the other thing to say, sort of in terms of a pitfall, but a hopeful possibility as well, is that sometimes the principles of recovery and the principles of what people need in the peripartum period can butt up against each other. So the example I often give when I'm training is sometimes, in recovery spaces, we'll talk about the need for changing your people, places, and things, which is very, very impactful if you have had people in your life who continue to either struggle in active addiction themselves or have been a part of either what's triggered you to use or enabling continued use. Makes sense to have some space from those people. In the infant mental health and parent mental health world, we talk about the importance of a maternal matrix, that web of people underneath you who get you and support you and understand you as you make this huge life transition into parenting. And it's not that it's impossible, but it's just important to name that we've built this program with a real understanding and a loving attention to sort of that bumping up against each other of, people need support, they need people in their lives. And sometimes it's coming at a time when we're saying to people, hey, maybe you should take some space from your mom. Hey, I wonder what it would be like to not take calls from your sister for a while. But those are the people that you are hoping to rely on as you become a parent. So those are just sort of some highlights of the ways that these specific learnings that we've had have become built into the pillars of how we built this model and built this work. And we'll be getting into them in even more depths in the many weeks ahead.
Thank you, Amy.
Pass it back to my colleagues. Sorry.
Yes, no, it's good. And then thank you so much for running us through that part. We've got a few minutes left. These are the remaining sections. We're just gonna skip over these. I please encourage you to read that chapter 1.1 so you get a deeper understanding of the foundations and concepts that we use in this work. Every section has key takeaways. Here's an example of this chapter. We can keep going now here. This is our next webinar coming up on preparing the organization. And we will be sending out more information about this, but we are going to be talking about like really those recovery oriented cultures and community partnerships and organizational leadership and how that impacts the work that we do. And so we're hopeful that you will be there for this. We'll keep moving. We have some opportunities for ongoing support. As we mentioned earlier, and it is here for more information or access to our library of resources and to download the guide or the portfolio, you can visit firststepstogether.ma.org. Every Friday from 9 to 10 a.m., the training and TA team holds office hours for family portfolio support, or we'd be happy to talk to you about today's webinar or anything else that you have on your mind. You can drop in at this web address. And if you need any further assistance or have any questions, you can contact me, Erica Napolitan, at this email address. We're very excited to have you here with us today. And if there's any questions, we can take them now. We've got about 2 minutes left, but there is also a survey in the chat. If you could please take a moment to fill that out before you leave today, that would be really appreciated. And okay, if there's any questions, we'd love to take them. Otherwise, thank you so much for being with us today. I think we can pull the slides down if we want. All right, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Wanda. Thanks, Connie.